I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Aaron Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers,
Anders
and Anton.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month, we're talking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the final film in the Indiana Jones series.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
In 213 BC,
Archimedes spoke to the dial.
That could change the course of history.
with this, we will have our victory.
It's not yours. You stole it.
Then you stole it.
And then I stole it.
Get back.
Does the world still need Indiana Jones? That's the question posed by Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the final film in the famous adventure franchise. An almost 80-year-old Indiana Jones, still played by Harrison Ford, has to track down Archimedes' Antikythera, a mechanism that reveals fissures in time, before a Nazi scientist, played by Mads Mikkelsen, and his gang of crypto-fascists can get it first and rewrite history. Indy's aided by old friends, including John Rhys-Davies' Sala, as well as his estranged goddaughter, Helena, played by series newcomer Phoebe Waller-Bridge, of Fleabag fame. His adventure takes him from New York City during the Moon Day Parade in 1969 to Morocco, Greece, and Sicily as he races to find the dial and save history. The film unequivocally answers that yes, the world does still need Indiana Jones. But does our world in 2023 still need Indiana Jones movies? Apparently not so much. Surprisingly, this latest Indiana Jones film bombed at the box office, proving that Disney's nostalgia play that began with Star Wars The Force Awakens in 2015 might have run its course. That film is probably the best comparison for Dial of Destiny. Like The Force Awakens, the film is not written or directed by its series creator, but rather comes from James Mangold and the current Lucasfilm Brain Trust led by Kathleen Kennedy. It's stylistically similar to the previous films, but not exactly so. For instance, the action scenes lack the clever staging and blocking of Steven Spielberg. But many elements are the same. There's the emphasis on real locations, real history, relatable emotional motivation in the midst of fantastic scenarios, slapstick humor, and lots of accidental escapes and fumbling heroics. John Williams once again does the score, and Harrison Ford, of course, once again stars in it, displaying a clear ownership over the role and the direction of the franchise. Perhaps the most interesting element about Dial of Destiny is that it makes its nostalgic lens a genuine thematic focus for the film. It's a movie that asks whether history matters anymore in a world where men walk on the moon and America is conquered as enemies. Its hero lovingly looks back on the past, devoting his life to the preservation of artifacts and the preservation of knowledge. And perhaps ironically, people nowadays are notoriously ahistorical, contemptuous of the past, proud of their ignorance, and happy to erase the entire slate of past accomplishments in order to forward some vague notions of justice and create their utopian tomorrow. Maybe that explains why the movie didn't do so well at the box office. As well, moviegoers themselves are also ignorant of past movies. Do Zoomers even know who Indiana Jones is? Do they care about preserving old artifacts, separating the legend from the history when it comes to ancient figures like Archimedes, investigating the ways that American history took advantage of the Nazis but is still clearly distinct from fascist European history? Does history even matter anymore? And are movies like Dial of Destiny necessary to remind us to look to the past, not only for adventure and entertainment, but also meaning and legacy? Something that the Indiana Jones movies do is preserve history through their recreations of the past. They keep people interested in things that happened decades and centuries ago, not only in the styles of adventure serials, but also the ancient legends of antiquity. In a way, they're cinematic monuments to the past. But do they matter anymore? Does the world still need Indiana Jones movies? And do they need this type of Indiana Jones movie? Anton, what are your thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? And do you think there's a place for movies as historically obsessed as Dial of Destiny in our current cinematic landscape?
I just got out of the movie a few hours ago. I watched it this afternoon. And I would say that I found it to be an adequate legacy sequel, but not that good. I didn't really like it that much. Maybe a moderate positive review. In some sense, I was surprised by the fact that I didn't strongly dislike it, and I enjoyed myself a fair bit. But watching the movie, I really found that Indiana Jones, whatever those movies are, is something of the past. I rewatched Raiders of the Lost Ark the night before. In that movie, which I love, which is an amazing movie, looks very much like a film of the past and not a film of the present. And so it seemed to me watching Dial of Destiny that this was very much a film torn between two worlds. And I think that partly explains the fact that it doesn't seem to please anyone. Whether you're, sort of the diehard Indiana Jones fans, whether it's new audiences, they tried to do a few different things, bridge some of those gaps. And I don't know if it's entirely successful at doing that. At the end of the day, it's an okay movie. And I definitely enjoyed seeing Harrison Ford's portrayal of this great character once again. But I don't think I needed this movie. At the same time, I'm not aggressively annoyed with it or anything like that.
How about you, Anders?
I think I liked it quite a bit more than Anton did. But I will say, you're spot on in saying that this is not necessarily of a piece with the old ones, in that it is definitely a movie of our time, no matter how obsessed with the past it is. Some of that I chalk up to the difference between James Mangold, who's a competent and generally I enjoy his movies, competent director, versus Spielberg, who really, among with the other sort of movie brats of that generation, really like understood films of the past. So Anton, you mentioned rewatching Raiders, which I had done earlier this year. I also rewatched Temple of Doom. And one thing that I would note about Temple of Doom, which perhaps out of all of them is the most unapologetically a film of the past. You could not make Temple of Doom today. It's in the terms of the way people talk today, it's quote problematic, but it is so much really like an adventure serial, like a Gunga Din or something like that, right? But also not just in its topicality, but the way it's shot. And that's the thing maybe for me that was the most jarring about Dial of Destiny, is not necessarily the story itself, which we can come back to in a second, but the way it's shot. There's clearly a lot of digital, even the when they shoot on location. And whereas Temple of Doom and Raiders with Douglas Slocum's cinematography is so classic, it looks like one of those like 1950s sort of Technicolor adventure films, right? In fact, I used Temple of Doom to calibrate my new TV's black levels and get it to look like an old movie, because that's how I want my TV setting. I don't want it super sharp and super clear necessarily. I want the blacks to be just right. I want it to blend into that cinematic filmic quality, right? So Dial of Destiny lacks some of that. But
so what was it you really liked it?
What I really liked, I mean, I still really love the character. I just really enjoyed it as a movie. Like, yeah, it's like compared to other Indiana Jones movies, it's probably like no question it's my least favorite of the 5. But if I compare it to other blockbusters that I've seen this year, with the possible exception of like Across the Spider-Verse, which is a totally different thing because it's an animated movie and it's very much of this moment. Like I think it's clearly better than most Marvel movies. I think it's a fun adventure. I like the characters. I thought it was funny. I even thought some of the action scenes were somewhat inventive, even though they probably have one chase too many, and the film could have probably cut 15 minutes. It
should have been 2 hours, not 2.5
yeah, exactly.
hours.
I agree. And I think if you had cut that, I think I would have liked the movie even more. I just had a really good time with it. And maybe I watched it with the rest of our family, our parents and my wife and kids.
That's the right setting for like a nostalgia trip. Then.
And they liked it. Everyone had a good time with it. It just felt like a good summer movie. And, Aaron, I want to go back to Aaron's thing about comparing these to the others. Like, you're absolutely right, though. Like, going back to this Mangold versus Spielberg, it's like, there's something once you lose those original creators, not just the actors and John Williams doing the score, just like Force Awakens, where it just doesn't quite hit right. And my friend, even last night, I was talking to him, he said, we agreed, like, it's good, but just like Force Awakens, Lucas drew on classic war movies, John Ford, all this stuff. Spielberg's drawing on classic adventure serials and, swashbucklers and all these like adventure, John Huston, all that stuff, right? And Mangold's just drawing in Spielberg.
But that's why Aaron's reference to Force Awakens is totally what's going on. So,
and I like Force Awakens.
It's an adequate legacy sequel, but like all legacy sequels, the reference point isn't the larger cinematic history. The reference point is the previous franchise, the original films that they're trying to reignite. But Aaron, so how much did you enjoy it?
Oh, I liked it.
Yeah.
I think it actually stands in kind of marked contrast to a lot of modern blockbusters. I agree with the craft is kind of similar, but I actually think the fact that it's a movie that's not particularly interested in setting up anything after, the fact that it's very much a last chapter, and it's like deliberately so, and that despite Spielberg and Lucas not being really involved beyond just like giving their blessing and saying have fun kind of thing, it meant that Harrison Ford took kind of more of an ownership of this movie.
Yeah.
And so the kind of artistic driving force of this film is not Mangold or the writers. It's Ford and his performance and the way that he's wrestling with this idea of like, where do I want to leave Indiana Jones off at?
And that might explain why the film thankfully corrected what I thought was going to be a mistake. With I was really, early in the film, after we get the World War II flashback, and we get a washed up Indiana Jones who's gone on to, a city university, no longer at an Ivy League. He's doing his retirement. He lives alone. He's separated from his wife. We don't know what happened to his kid at this stage. We find out that Mutt died, I guess, in Vietnam is the presumption. And I was like, oh my goodness, are they doing like another deadbeat dad? Like, we had to turn Han Solo into a deadbeat dad, and now we got to turn Indiana Jones. Okay, Indiana Jones, if we even go back to Crystal Skull or all of his previous stuff, this is not someone who has an upstanding, domestic life. He's plagued by just, ruining the women he's with. Right, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, like Miriam, whatever they had when he was probably, the grad student of her dad. Like, so it's not that like he's this upstanding guy with women or with the family. He finds out that he has a kid later on. But I was like, why do we always have to go back to the well and like sully these characters? And I was glad that the movie chose to say that, well, we're using that as kind of like to initiate the arc we're going to give him. And I was very happy to see Miriam come in the last scene. And
bringing Miriam back. If they hadn't done that, I would have been definitely 100% negative on the movie. Actually, I understand why they didn't bring Mutt back. I don't think it's entirely people hating Mutt. I think part of it is I don't think Shia was going to come back. So
yeah, I don't know if they wanted Shia. I don't know if they should have. But
right, and then it works narratively that if there's one thing that you can understand might cause a rift in a relationship, the loss of a child is obviously one of the most traumatic things, right?
Yeah.
But I'm so glad that they healed it, right? Like, because that would have, to me, ended on a sour note.
But I think that also that reflects a bit of what Aaron's saying with Harrison Ford. Like, he loves the Indiana Jones character, right? He's notorious for kind of not liking Han Solo. And I guess he warmed up enough that he was going to do, one last go and get to kill him off. I don't think it was just a money thing. I think he actually wanted more of like that kind of a death for Han Solo back in like Return of the Jedi anyway. But he's always loved Indiana Jones. And so he clearly was the person who wanted to do, like he had been talking about wanting to do a fifth one before he's too old. But I think some of the choices with the characters, I'm not sure if Harrison Ford would have signed off on like he just like ends off in ruins. I was also unclear of like, oh, you're going to do like a Daniel Craig Bond and kill him off and he's going to stay, or by staying in the past.
I'm actually glad
for a
they
half
didn't.
second I was not sure they weren't going to leave him.
Oh, for sure.
I thought they were going to.
I mean, but this is one of those things is that I find the ending surprised me, not necessarily in like a narrative sense, but more because it went against the way that most movies nowadays operate, and it went more like a traditional proper sequel and more of a like an elegant swan song in the sense. Like I actually think once they go back, so
total spoilers.
If you're listening to this and you haven't seen it, I don't know, whatever, who cares?
Well, we've already spoiled all the endings.
Yeah, no, exactly. But like once they go back in time to Syracuse on Sicily, like 210 BC, and he meets Archimedes, and he's like, I've dreamed about this my whole life. I was like, I thought, okay, one, it was an interesting way to do the time travel. I actually like that it's surprised the assumption, because you are completely working on the same level as Mikkelsen's character. like we are assuming that he's correct the whole time and that he can go back and kind of play with it. And it's like, no, this thing only takes you back to this one moment.
So it feeds into one of the themes in all the Indiana Jones films and connects with the hubris of the villains who think that they understand and can control all things.
But then it's also like, so the movie did a good job of making me assume that he was correct, even though it, that's how it always works in these movies, like that the villain's not correct. But it's also then I was like, oh, are they gonna do a No Time to Die thing? Are they gonna do these other movies where it's like, I actually always kind of get annoyed when characters needlessly sacrifice themselves. I'm like, you're not, there's no gain here. I understand the want where it's like, you're at your dream moment in the past. Why wouldn't you want to just kind of stay and like, this is my dream come true. Why would
as far as he's concerned, he has nothing left in the 21st century. He feels so out of place. Like I do kind of like, there's little,
but that's the movie.
Kind of like,
so the message then is the movie's trying to say he does have some meaning.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. That's
the people
why
he loves are the people that matter.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean is that's the kind of message that I'm actually a little surprised the movie make, because a lot of other movies nowadays don't make those kind of messages.
Yeah. You could have done a very easy, heroic death.
Yeah. But it also is one of those things
substantial.
So we can get into this in a moment, right after this, but like it also is extending if Helena does not bring him back and kind of force him to resolve his relationships with Marion, she's not redeemed as a character either.
Right. Because she's not not a very good person.
No, she's not.
She's of actually more like him when he was young too, in a lot of ways.
Well, she's
maybe more so.
She's like
more of a
what,
Belloc. Yeah,
she's what what India's always slandered as being a grave robber.
Right.
Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory.
And he is to some extent, in the sense that he steals things from graves, sells them to a museum. But Indiana Jones was clearly never doing this about getting, cash.
That belongs in a museum.
The motivation was the obsession with it's almost like a collector more, and the obsession with history.
Yeah. So just the idea that it resolves the arcs for the characters. It has a hopeful ending, but not an ending that like is spinning out some kind of spin-off stuff, which, I mean, of course they could, if they really wanted to, they could have a Helena and Teddy movie.
But they're not going to, because the box office. They're not going
to, but I don't think there's really that much appetite. Like they tried it last time with being like, we could have made more Mutt movies, and they didn't.
He picks up the hat, right? Like,
well, I'm glad that okay. One, I'll say that I think your the comments about the ending make me warm up to the movie a little bit more, in the sense of I think the movie deserves credit as being a competent blockbuster, an adventure, and even if I think it pales versus the other ones, even Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it's still not like a bad movie. I wouldn't say it's a bad movie, just to be clear. And I think you're making me like some of what it's doing better.
But there are elements of the movie that I'm uncomfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of them is the film's kind of attempts to rectify the mistakes of the perceived mistakes of previous films, specifically Temple of Doom, by leaning into a variation of it. So like Temple of Doom is the most derided, and it's all about ethnic stereotypes.
Also has some of the biggest offenders, but okay.
No, but that's what like people complain about, the fact that it's racist. They complain about the fact that it has no real interest in having like strong female character, like this kind of modern sense of a strong female character. No interest in it. Doesn't care. Willie's a complete buffoon.
Willie's completely helpless and freaks out intensely. She's
a complete hysterical nut, and that's like played for laughs. And then, so it's like, okay, Helena is this kind of roguish, very independent woman, very morally ambiguous, very competent. Is not like
a bit of a Mary Sue.
Yeah, not a traditionally like beautiful woman, but also like has like a sexual edge to her, and she is very comfortable in her own skin, and she gives it back as hard as she gets it, but then she has, for some reason, her own short round, Teddy.
Yeah,
Teddy.
Who's
by the way, as soon as they introduce him in the hotel in Morocco, pretending learning how to fly a plane, I was like, oh, he's gonna fly a plane at some point.
Oh, of course, that's why you do that. But even like the whole chase scene with her like ex-fiance, and it's just like, oh, these dirty North Africans are gonna be like cutting her head off because he like betrayed them. I'm just like, Wait, okay, so is this just Hollywood saying that, like, we don't want to be racist in this way, but we're fine with this? And it's just like, it's a very
it's trading
weird...
into another stereotype.
A stereotype of like North African.
Yeah. It's just, it's that, those kind of things where I'm like, it seems reactionary in the truest sense, where it's like reacting against the other, but without a more understanding of like, what are you rooting this in? You just seem to be like flipping something.
You're making me want to go back and defend Temple of Doom.
Well,
but
I love Temple of Doom.
I love Temple of Doom, but here's the thing: that it's a different story. And the other thing I'd actually note is whenever we want to talk about sequels to originals, and when we're talking about Star Wars and the prequels and the sequels, and now we're getting essentially, I think we kind of agree that we have the original trilogy. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is essentially the prequel, like even though it takes place afterwards, it plays kind of like the Lucas prequels.
Absolutely.
And then this one is the Disney sequel.
And I think that but
even more different than Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yes, even more different than Star Wars. Temple of the Doom. My perception was that growing up, I knew many people who didn't like Temple of Doom, who absolutely loved Raiders of the Lost Ark, who loved Last Crusade, often liked Last Crusade best, and didn't particularly care for Temple of Doom. Didn't really watch it. And that had nothing to do with kind of like fan culture. It was just like a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, so when people talk about like, we had the first, backlash to Crystal Skull and people were like, there's only 3 Indiana Jones movies. I'm sort of like, you know what? I never really got the sense that like everyone was on board already for Temple of Doom.
Some people
I think people are just remembering how much everyone loves
the first one.
But everyone just loves the Sean Connery, Dr. Jones.
Exactly. The thing about Temple of Doom also is like I was one of those weirdos where there were times when I said Temple of Doom was almost one of my favorites, but that's because I liked the extremity of it. I liked the provocation.
It's the most scary.
It's the scariest. It has the I loved I liked Short Round, but I also like they even had like rewatching it. It has probably the most like it has like the whole like sex comedy bit when they're like going back and forth between the bedrooms, which is very funny.
It's like, funny. It's super funny.
It's more of a it's actually pretty much a straight comedy. It's kind of
the first half
old,
is
like,
no, it's not a comedy.
And then it becomes a horror film, right? When Indy's possessed and stuff.
It's like operating on those genuine 1930s rhythms in which if it's a movie that's an entertainment, it's supposed to be like super funny or super scary or everything's amplified.
Most movies today aren't willing to go there.
And these old adventure movies, if you think King Kong, and there's numerous other ones, the adventurer hero and the woman that he's going to be romantically connected with, they like have to passionately hate each other.
It's like a Howard Hawks type thing, right? Like
it's like the more that they hate each other, that's how you know that they actually like each other.
I would argue that both Star Wars, Empire, Raiders, Temple of Doom do a Ford Hawks exchange in both of them, but that's another thing. We're not talking about Dial of Destiny.
So back to Dial of Destiny. My comment is that the treatment of Helena and aspects of the plot in which she's involved, I'm mixed on.
Yes,
and it's partially because I don't know if I really like Waller-Bridge as a performer. But I don't really think the character is like poorly written or anything. And I think the fact that they clearly invest in an arc that like resolves in a satisfactory manner proves that there's more to the character than just this kind of like, this classic reactionary Hollywood approach to female characters specifically.
Yeah. I think rooting her in Indy's past, having her dad be the Toby Jones character from the opening sequence, and how he kind of was driven crazy by the Antikythera era.
But the problem...
Antikythera, yeah.
No, I agree. So they do an okay job at tying her into the world because the film invests a lot of time on that initial sequence back in World War II. But it does raise the problem, I would say, on a conceptual level. Like, I don't know why Helena exists in the Indiana Jones world. And the only reasons I understand why they added her in, like they only make sense to me as like a corporate boardroom where we're like, we need to have like a smart, capable young woman who's going to be like the sidekick. Because like part of the problem with the film is that you're like, you have to create a character from scratch that we have you're doing a legacy sequel and you're going to create a character from scratch that we have no attachment to, and then try to say that they're, like the new hero sidekick. And like, this is the same problem I think with Crystal Skull. And I don't dislike Mutt the way like some people hate him, But I also find that most films don't do a good job of ever bringing in kind of like the kid or the younger sidekick who's going to kind of like take over in a sense. And a lot of it has to do with that. You're like, we're not going to see this movie because of Helena. And no one who watches Fleabag is going to see Dial of Destiny. And, you know, I would say
Except
like my wife quite liked the character. She likes the Fleabag show, and she liked aspects
So I guess that's
of
who it's for, is our
the
wives,
Helena
yeah.
character. But I just think it's like, it's sort of a weird choice on a basic level. You're like, why did you create this character to be like the central character in this film? Why couldn't we just
I will
have
say, how
a
about
movie
this?
about
You know,
Indiana
there was,
Jones?
in a certain sense, given every recent things, there was a lost opportunity to bring back Short Round,
An immense,
a 40-year-old Short Round as
I'm sure the production
sidekick,
timeline does not match up with the success.
Well, because this was canceled. It started before COVID, and they had
Okay.
to stop filming twice during COVID to.
But now that we have this, and now that Ke Huy Quan like came back, it's such a missed opportunity. It would have been such a good movie if we had just had Indy and Short Round grown up. Like that would have been
40-year-old.
That would have been
Short Round
awesome.
in the
That would have been
1960s,
so
yeah.
good.
No, I agree.
Maybe he has emigrated to America. He's living in New York City. You know,
No,
like, have all
honestly,
that stuff, like-
no. You could essentially take the entirety of Helena, like the emotional plotting, and just give it to Short Round.
Yes, and you don't need then the Toby Jones.
Because you already have the
character at all.
emotional association. It's that they are scared of touching Temple of Doom as the thing to tie everything to, and it is the current Hollywood dictates of.
But they're
Indiana
missing
Jones
out on the
is
affection
the
that
male,
people have
so
for
we
Ke Huy
need.
Quan.
No, of course it's usually a but this is why Anton's comment about like a boardroom dictate makes sense. And this is a thing in Hollywood. It's with Disney and it's with Sony and a lot of these producers. They specifically love Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Like she comes in and does script rewrites.
I don't think she did on this one though.
Well,
Yes,
she
she
probably
did.
did a rewrite.
Okay, but she wasn't
She's not
credited. But, yeah,
No,
okay.
but the same way like No Time to Die.
Yeah.
She.
No,
she
so that's
did
why we have. That's why we have on the. So essentially, she's redoing the ending of No Time to Die. Instead of we didn't get a sequence where he like lays back on the beach and the Roman fire just flies down and it goes all white on the screen. Like,
And then
But
they're
so
all
this
toasting
is-
him back in New York. Yeah.
yeah.
To James.
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 But this is an example, I think, to tie it back to some of my initial points, is that this movie is it's most interesting in the fact that it is a movie profoundly obsessed with things that are no longer in vogue.
Yeah.
And yet, as a movie, as a Hollywood object, it is held back by the dictates of now, which actually have nothing but contempt for the way movies were.
That's why there's a contradiction built into the film.
Yeah.
It in some sense like it's trying to do two different things.
Yeah. And so like again, I actually don't think Waller-Bridge is bad. She's not my type of performer or anything, and Helen the character is fine. It's just she gets too much of the weight of this plot, and it's held back by the fact that there's no prior association with the character or no like star power on her sense, what makes us automatically invested in it.
And it doesn't
other
lean.
sense.
She's just genuinely not a big enough star. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I would say I found myself sort of like moderately surprised that I didn't dislike Helena's character.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw what they were going to do. I was like, I don't know if I need this. Why is she in this movie? But I found that the film, again, towards its contradictions, it doesn't lean into the strengths of Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and it doesn't lean into Helena's strengths as a character. So she's best when it's like the scene in Morocco, like at the casino where she's trying to the auction, right? And she's trying to sell things. So her strengths is like, she has some of the witty lines. She can push back against whatever Indiana Jones wants to say,
She's kind of a classic
or anyone
British
else.
kind of like, femme character who can like dish. Exactly.
Yeah, and so and she's also like she has
wit,
wit, so
exactly.
she uses that. A really good scene showing her strengths is when she talks through all. She's explaining the cipher, and at the same time she's getting her dynamite behind her ready. And I was like, this is like where the character's strengths are. You're being witty in a scenario. She that's how she exerts power.
Professor Schmidt, And nice to meet you in person.
Sup, man?
150.
After our conversation, Michaud, I thought we'd come to an agreement about the dime.
Funny, the last time I saw the other guy who looks like you, he was also after this.
Your numbers were light, Professor Schmidt. But good news is you're here now. The bid is 160.
You don't seem to understand, Michaud. This relic is my property.
It's not yours. You stole it.
Then you stole it.
And then I stole it. It's called capitalism. The bid is 160.
160.
170.
You should have stayed in New York.
170.
You should have stayed out of Poland.
170. Anyone? Anyone? Going! Going!
Gone!
What I don't find believable is all of a sudden she can ride a motorbike and jump onto a plane.
Agreed.
And my thing is like, you know, people will be like, well, Indiana Jones can do that. He's just a professor. And you're like, well, okay.
But he's already been shown to do it in like 4 films. Yeah.
But also it's just like, you know, what would be, we never even got a sense that she like raids tombs. Like, you know, like I'm not like, you just didn't really establish that she's some sort of her physical prowess, that she goes around and like fights people and stuff. You've established that she's kind of a notorious type person.
That's a kind of a classic modern movie thing, though.
It is. Anyone, if the plot needs it, anyone can jump on a motorbike and just like leap and like.
And it's the best thing.
Ass.
Sorry, before you step in there, just last comment on this is that it's funny because again, this is another one of those aspects where the movie is not entirely reconciled to itself, which is the fact that this movie still leans into Indy taking a beating constantly and fumbling. Like the opening scene, the prologue, there's aspects of it that I'm not like the de-aging, whatever. We can get if we want. I don't really care that much about talking about it. It is what it is because you can't recast them at this point. Yeah. But it's like when he's going to be hung and the bomb falls through and they have the gag and they're all kind of stop and watch and then it falls further and it blows up and he survives it by only the fact that he's literally being hung currently. And then he's like swinging around, but he has to get out at the last moment. Like Indy still in this movie, it understands that like, yeah, Indy's this awesome hero who only survives by the skin of his
sheer
teeth.
dumb luck. Yeah.
Yeah. All the time.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Let's talk about the opening because that'll bridge me into something which I think is a strength of the film. I was mostly like, you can talk about the ethics of de-aging. We can talk about that. I think they've got the technology improved in many ways.
It's
like,
improved, but I still don't buy it. It still looks.
Okay, Anton, I thought of you because I think that the biggest fault is that he still sounded like old Indy.
Yeah.
Right? The voice doesn't match in some of the movements. It's a bit of the Irishman syndrome that you talked about, right?
It's
the visual.
It looks like deepfake.
Yeah, but the visual is pretty good. It's pretty accurate. Like I was pretty impressed with that part.
I actually wasn't. I still think it.
I think it's just
real.
the uncanniness of the mismatch of the voice and the movements with the visual. I think if you took a still shot of the visual, it's pretty impressive.
But within movement, there's something about it when you have that within movement. Like it doesn't look right. Like the way there's a point where he grabs some food and like he's supposed to be eating it, and it doesn't look like a face eating.
I think though that like at this point, if you're going to do it in 1945, you kind of can't recast it, right? Like not the way like you did like River Phoenix.
No,
like,
but, yeah.
And actually one interesting thing I thought about this film, and maybe we can talk about when we talk about again the whole idea of like Indy meeting like actually meeting Archimedes and stuff like that. And you're like, if you are someone like me who's watched a lot of like even the old young Indiana Jones Chronicles back in the 90s, which I'm very like, Disney, please put those on Disney Plus.
Yes,
I want to watch them again. And
why
I don't have
so
copies. Like, because they you know, because they were proving grounds for the prequels. But also I love that like Indy, you know, in the very first episode is a like 8-year-old meets Lawrence of Arabia, you know, like stuff like that. Like he's
Manahari, he meets all these people.
Exactly. I love that. Like Indy is a little bit of a Forrest Gump character in that way. But the like, so I have no problem with that because it's already built into what Lucas's conception of it, right? In the young Indiana Jones Chronicles. But I think at this point, people aren't going to accept a stand-in for Harrison Ford at that point. And I'm actually glad that they never decided to like redo Indiana Jones with, I don't know, like some other actor.
Chris Pratt.
Role. Yeah.
That was thrown around.
God, that would have been.
It was thrown around.
Bad. That's a bad idea.
Well, yeah, I think this
I like
movie,
Chris Pratt, but he shouldn't be.
No, Chris Pratt can do his own thing.
This movie is, well, you go and then I'll go on to that part.
But like, it was kind of fun watching like another World War II scene with like Indiana Jones. And the main thing that this movie does for me is like Mads Mikkelsen was born to be an Indy villain. He is perfect as Walt Voller. He is like, and he does both the transition from like the being like a Nazi in 1945 to being the Wernher von Braun character in the 60s. I think he's actually really in the role. And I've actually even watched some of the interviews with him. Like he talks about how much he's like, I've studied the history of, like the way that these Nazis were incorporated both into American and, Operation Paperclip. And also they worked obviously for the Soviets. They worked for other groups. And he's like, he actually studied photos of von Braun and how he had the cool glasses and the wavy hair. And I'm like, man, Mikkelsen is like, I think the best part of the movie in my opinion.
Mikkelsen's a very good villain, but the film doesn't provide like, I think that the film was like lacking overall in terms of like the actual villainy.
Oh, but it has amazing acrobatic henchmen too.
No, but he's a good central villain, but he isn't like, so if you were going to go with sort of the Nazi spies angle, you're like, why don't we have like more characters? Like you should have gone into like a Notorious type thing where I get like, you know what I mean? Like some sort of a sense of a network of like these Nazi spies. Like why aren't we in South America getting some like posh Nazi guy living down there? Like there's a lot of possibilities they did, and they settled on the scientist character, fine. And then just like a couple of henchmen. Yeah. And you're like, to me, it's just like partly it's not, what doesn't work for me is that usually Indiana Jones is overwhelmed by the odds. It's like, Indiana Jones, he's climbing onto a U-boat, he's riding off on a horse against, several trucks and cars full of guys alone. And in this, you're like, it's 4 versus like 1 so it's a race quest. So we have 2 parties trying to find the same object, but it's like small scale. Mm-hmm. And I understand with the timeline that they can't just have like Nazi soldiers everywhere or something like this. But I do feel like it means that Indiana Jones is like fighting a couple other guys and he's not stacked up against the large odds. We only get that in the opening sequence.
But there's an interesting thing where for the middle part of the movie, until like Voller basically breaks with the U.S. government, he's got the government agents working for him too, right? They don't realize that he's going to betray them as well.
No, but it was very unclear. I just thought it was poorly done about articulating what's going on with that. Like, you know what I mean? So you're like, if you're going to try and say that the government is using him and is fine with that, like we should have had more characters. We need some suits to come in, like, because they were just using the one like black woman, like CIA agent is like the only bridge. And like, it would have been more effective. Like if you want to sell me that the government's actually behind this, we need a couple of these like boring suits to come into the room and like have a conversation with him and like things like this. Yeah. It just like overall, I was unclear on like what's the relationship between all these pieces.
It is kind of funny that it like assumes familiarity with like Operation Paperclip and just the fact that like Nazis built the rockets for the space missions, that you would just know it. Which is funny for an Indiana Jones movie when they actually kind of like fall over themselves explaining to the history that a kid would understand.
Did you guys ever go to Sunday school?
Yeah, well, you should have had a scene where he's like, "Didn't you hear about Operation Paperclip?"
No, exactly.
Like, you needed more of that kind of stuff.
And even
overall, the movie
doesn't
doesn't do a great
getting,
job.
Like hosed off of the radiation after the radiation, right? Where they explain like why the government even doesn't trust him 100%.
Well, exposition wise, so this movie is half an hour too long. People
complain about exposition, but it doesn't give enough.
No, it's half an hour too long, but it has too little of the proper exposition we need. So you actually need an Indiana Jones sequence. Like this is like a Lucas thing, like Spielberg does it too. But yeah, sometimes you actually have to have the conference scene where we all sit down and you tell us like this is the mission or like this is like what we're looking for. And there's like not a lot
Maverick did where they explain clearly the goals of the mission.
Yeah, but they don't even give us the like play by play like Robert Langdon style like Indy explaining things about the history. Partly because the character he's talking to knows the history just as well as him, but the audience doesn't. And so I feel like the impact of, you mentioned, Anders, that you're like, oh, I was looking up that this dial's like, kind of like a legendary artifact. You're like, why isn't that should be
I knew about it
before.
More. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But that ties into something else that I don't like about the movie. Or I don't know if it's probably not that I just don't like it. It's a deficiency in the film, and it shows what I would say is a lack of awareness about the themes of the other Indiana Jones movies. Mm-hmm. The other Indiana Jones
I agree with you on this.
Are interested in an engagement with the transcendent.
Yes. And
this movie does not have that. This movie reinterprets Indiana Jones' relationship to archaeology as being primarily about like science And like, so he's historical, he's a historian, he's an archaeologist, but it's like a scientific pursuit of knowledge. That's always been an aspect. But you forget when he's introduced in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Dr. Jones, expert in the occult.
Yes, exactly.
And this movie is afraid of bringing in the occult.
Because the occult is not popular nowadays. But I love that.
Well, it is, but in a positive sense.
Yeah, but okay. So the interesting thing, well, occult isn't secret knowledge, but like transcendent.
No, but I'm saying that like all the people that would be villains in past indie films are now like the people who would be complaining about the movie being racist or something.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, like, for many years there was someone on a message board that I was part of who often talked about how the Indiana Jones films, if you put them in chronological order, are also about a certain religious progression. You have from like the polytheism of like Hinduism,
like the Vedic
to Judaism, to Christianity, to New Age / like alien type stuff. It actually progresses in that way.
Well,
right?
I wouldn't
This
say
one kind of
Crystal Skull's
messes
New Age at all.
No, but it is about like aliens and like other dimensions and like a kind of scientified
it's like a
idea.
Well, it's like that, like ancient apocalypse. Like
yeah, exactly.
It's all about
right?
the
but
connections
it's like,
between
but it's kind of like
and like
post-Christian in that sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I think it kind of is. And this one kind of like undoes that neat narrative like progression through the films if you wanted to do that. I mean, that's an idiosyncratic reading. But the other thing is, though, like as you say, though, in the other indie films, like the stuff that he's experienced, he shouldn't be so like credulous or incredulous at this point. Even my son was like, the worst line in the movie is when he's like, and maybe it isn't what you believe, it's how hard you believe it. He just rolled his eyes at me and he was like,
well, you've literally seen
an 11-year-old boy laughed out loud in the theater at that line because he thought it was silly. And he's like, this guy's literally seen God. Like,
that was literally probably that was in the script rewrite. They literally, someone came in and said like, we have to insert this line that we can't. Like it's such an. But it's actually nonsensical.
It's actually just nonsensical, even within the context of this film.
Well, in the context of this film, it applies to Voller and his belief: if I will believe Nazism properly, and I'll do it properly,
I believe it
in
hard
the way that Hitler did not do it correctly. Like I'll do it right.
But like that's by the film's understanding, he has a credible like belief system because he believes it hard enough.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, Hitler just didn't understand it. And like, we were going to do
Hitler
it
was just a bad strategist. If I was that guy, I could make the Third Reich actually win.
But this also ties into a major thing with Indiana Jones. There's a major thing with Indiana Jones is that, Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the greatest action movies, maybe the greatest action
adventure films ever. Yeah. And action sequences. Yeah.
At the end, it has the most Deus Ex Machina you can
literally
get in a movie. It literally has God in a box, destroy all the villains. In all of the movies, even Crystal Skull, so the villains are hubristic. They misunderstand what the thing that they think is going. They think whatever device that they find will give them power, and then they misunderstand it, and it actually destroys them.
All of them, yeah,
all of them.
Well,
and it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with stones, like the Judeo-Christian God or you're dealing with
Spalko,
Hindu spirituality.
Spalko opens up the thing and is destroyed by the interdimensional beings. Yeah,
because what the message is that there's forces in the universe that are beyond us. Humans will be proud, try to control them. People like Hitler, who are obsessed with the occult, think this will give them like a special super weapon, and that will destroy them. And this is why. Crystal Skull's great to bring in the atom bomb because that's what the atom bomb's doing.
Exactly.
But this movie turns it into a kind of like a celebration of like human ingenuity through the character of Archimedes, because he's built this device, and at the end it's like, oh, this is so amazing, this device you've built, and there's actually nothing that's ultimately beyond like there's beyond the villain's control, but not really beyond like the character's control. Like there's no surrender to a transcendent. But Spielberg was like obsessed with this because this is the ending also of like Close Encounters, where again it's like the movie's about like a surrender to a transcendent, and you're like, this is clearly a thing that's in Indiana Jones, and they seem to not understand that. And this is partly why I think the occult or something, there has to be something strange and beyond human knowledge, human understanding. Because what Indiana Jones is interested in is not just history, but what's like beneath history.
And like, one thing I love about Crystal Skull is Kate Blanchett's Spalko is not only just like like a good like Soviet agent, she's also like a psychic and
Yeah,
like all
yeah.
this stuff. Like it makes her super like weird and creepy.
But then
and
it
I
tries
love
to, it like there was during the Cold War. You have these intelligence agencies trying to tap into, psychic
Paranormal
training
stuff,
to defeat the enemy.
the other side. Yeah.
No, I agree, Anton. It's a good reading. I think this is another one of those. It's not to excuse it because this makes it very clear that this is not a Spielberg movie.
Yes.
And so that means that in a profound way, it is not of a piece with the other Indiana Jones movies, even if it still is a historical adventure. And it still has the hubris of the villain defeating him because he thinks he can control history as a concept, and then history itself through the Romans attacking Syracuse kill them. And it's not like Archimedes is like a being with like control of that situation either.
Yeah.
He's helpless to the powers of the time Fisher. He's like, it's pre and after, right? It's more of like the meeting of the night in Last Crusade in that sense.
Well, does the movie create a?
It's a time loop.
Is it a time loop movie?
Right, because they're like, what
he'll
defeated...
get the pieces, he'll get the watch and
the
stuff
watch.
because they were there. Okay.
Yeah, and that's why he puts the
And that's why
propellers on
Voeller's watch is in Archimedes' tomb in Syracuse, right?
Okay. So I guess in maybe an abstract sense, you could say that time is beyond is like the transcendent.
No, I
force.
agree that there's no transcendent aspect, but what it does is it still has that reverence for the fact that the history is real, in the sense that there is the fantastical aspect of the central object unlocks a truth about something that is beyond us in this present moment, which in this case is the fact that Archimedes was a real person, that the Battle of Syracuse is not a thing you read in a book. It's a thing where real people died. It's something that is as real as anything you currently experience. And so even though it does not transcend human existence, it clarifies the idea of our own ignorance in our present moment. And so like it keeps that kind of framing. It just doesn't have the occult transcendent aspect. It doesn't have any religious dimension. And it's weirdly rationalist, using science as a kind of stand-in for those same feelings, assuming that the audience feels towards science that people 30, 40 years ago would feel towards religion, which is kind of accurate towards our modern audiences. That being said, it's not the correct choice for Indiana Jones as a character.
Yeah. And it's partly why the movie, the movie lacks mystery and it's not scary at all. And one of the things revisiting Raiders reminded me that you're like Indiana Jones is just as much about car chases and like in fist fights as it is about sneaking past booby traps. Like they do some of that, so we do get one cave
scares.
Exploration.
Yeah.
But then there's like just not a lot of there's such great atmosphere in the other indie movies where you're actually like on edge of like, ooh, this place is a little bit creepy, a little bit like, or I just like don't know like what's gonna pop around the corner, who's here, and there's not a lot of that in this. Like it doesn't have a palpable atmosphere, partly because you're setting it in the United States, the first part, on the Moon Day, which is an interesting choice for like the whole Nazi scientist aspect that they're bringing in, but it doesn't allow for a lot of like atmosphere to be generated.
I mean, but that also adds an extra texture. Like, so the Moon Days thing is important because it's not just about the Nazi scientists helping America. That the idea that American history, American progress is built on Nazi progress. Like, this is one of those, occult histories of our modern world that people like to ignore, right? They have to tidy it up. But then
you don't build the Apollo rockets without the V2 rockets.
Exactly. But then the people also go the other way, which is what I suggest in our opening, where they say like America's built with that. It's all bad. Throw it all out. And it's like Indiana Jones is like, no, that like the whole point of this whole series is like the past is valuable. We have to preserve it. We have to remember it on its terms, not on our terms. The thing about Moon Day is that it's also this moment in time where the type of hero that Indiana Jones represents, the tough 1930s and 40s guy, is no longer the hero the world that he exists in cares about. They care about those three astronauts.
Yeah.
Those are the heroes that we care about. The men of science, not the men of action. The men of the future, not the men of the past. So like it's like a thematic thing again. It's like this world already in 1969 is past Indiana Jones.
Yes. But the sad thing is then that the movie coming out in 2023 kind of, by being made, kind of says like, kind of the world has moved beyond Indiana
sadly,
Jones.
This is the confirmation point at the end. And so the movie, watching it, despite its aspects of it that don't quite work for me. I still was like heartened by the fact that there's a big budget movie starring an old actor that seems to have like a genuine love for old things. It made me happy that Hollywood is still willing to spend this amount of money, even if it's through a nostalgic, cynical approach to it. That it's like, we're going to make a movie about how it's cool that like an ancient mathematician built like cool stuff and there was like Roman battles, and that we should be interested in this. And this is like a means of being excited about the world we live in and its possibilities. The thing that depresses me is that constantly throughout the movie, Indy is like, does anybody know history anymore? Like the whole scene where he's talking about like the Battle of Syracuse, come on people, like this is interesting stuff, and they don't give a crap. They want to just put the TV on. And the reactions to this movie in our culture, the fact that people didn't go see it, the fact that people have such a disdain for the concept of history, like in all aspects.
They just want to put the Beatles on, man, and like party.
But even towards the Beatles, they have this contempt now.
Who needs it?
My dear girl, there are some things that just aren't done. Such as drinking Dom Perignon 53 above a temperature of 38 degrees Fahrenheit. That's as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs.
Yeah, I did love the link where it's like, okay, I can just think of Goldfinger, Connery, and then it's like, yeah, his dad hated the Beatles, so he hates the Beatles, or would have hated the Beatles. But it's just like, are we past a world where you can have a movie that's like, oh, hey kids, like let's go explore history? Is like, do kids read the Magic Treehouse books anymore, where like they go back in time to historical episodes? Do children's after school cartoons have ever things set in the past that are actually trying to engage with like the past on its own terms?
Well, like no, because it's a flattened version of history, right? It's only history is only read as mirrors or a wasteland that needs to be ignored.
Yeah, totally off topic, but this is why like films like Robert Eggers' The Witch or The Northman are great, is because they actually allow the past to be strange and weird.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Well, I mean,
they don't have the main characters be like, they're the hero because they share our modern values, even though it's back then,
But that's part of the mystery of history, of the past, that Indiana Jones has always tapped into, which is one of its pleasures, is that you're like, there's so much in the past that is fascinating. There's so much out there beyond what you know. And it's like, it's all there because it's past. Like, there is just so many riches and treasures back there that you can explore. And so, I wish there was more adventures where you like tease out. And that's why, like, as ridiculous as they are, I do enjoy my Dan Brown because I just like getting like a bunch of historical random facts interspersed with an adventure. Indiana Jones does it in a much better fashion. But I do like that historical treasure hunt.
No, I agree. But so like, to go back to my initial question where it's the thing that I ended my keynote with, it's like, does the world still need Indiana Jones movies?
It needs but they don't necessarily want it.
Exactly. And I think that's sad. Like, I think we need movies, even movies that are flawed like Dial of Destiny. It's better than the alternative in my mind. And I want more movies that engage with the past as something that is like entertaining and fun and like worth preserving. And this is the other thing with movies of this type. Any movie set in the past, in our broader like cultural imagination, are acts of preservation. They shape the way we think about the past stronger than any other thing that we engage with. People will always be like, yeah, I know it's a movie. It's like, yes, of course. But when you think about the Roman Empire, you think of Gladiator. I'm sorry, you've seen the movie. That's how you think of it. You don't read. You have no interest in other things. And so you suck it up through the culture you engage with. And so I want these cultural properties that are still mass culture properties to actually serve as monuments, because we've torn all of our other monuments down.
Yeah. And I think it's why the multiverse is is the dominant form for like it. The multiverse aligns with how the culture operates now, where it's just like, everything's kind of like, even though it's a multiverse, it's actually like a flattened universe, and it just brings everything together onto the same playing field.
Well, remember, in every universe, and within all these multiverse tales, in every universe, you are important, and you are actually the only thing that really matters. And so it's like, that's why I come away from a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I feel kind of depressed over the message of the movie, and other people are like, I was bawling tears, and it's like, yeah, but see, like, this is
to flatter your sensibility.
This is the
of your
fundamental
importance.
difference between me and you. It's like I don't find that internal confirmation comforting. I find it horrifying. If I'm the only thing that exists, that is depressing. But ending of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I'm like, oh, it's like an affirmation of the people around you and the world that precedes you. It's not one at the expense of the other.
Elsa never really believed in the Grail. She thought she'd found a prize.
What did you find, Dad?
Me? Illumination.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Three Brothers Filmcast.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.